Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from Renta, and thank you kindly for stopping by. It was a pleasure meeting Diana Layfield, the CEO of the Africa region for Standard Chartered Bank, and the CEO Peter Sands. I thank my friends Richard Messi and Lamine Manjang for the gracious introductions. I'll put up a photograph. I wanted to take a selfie. Lamine wasn't too keen, and we ended up getting some other fellow to take a rather grainy photograph of Diana. Lamine and myself. Diana says many interesting things about Africa, and I've been following her for a while actually on the commentary, and it was a pleasure meeting her. And then subsequently I went for dinner at Dr. Christian Turner, who had a Diwali party last night, and I'll put up a photograph of him and Claire Turner, and the Diwali party celebrates the triumph of light over darkness, and it was a very good function. I'd like to thank them both as well. Home thoughts turn to the black and white category winner in overall wildlife photographer of the year. It's called The Last Great Picture by Michael Nichols, and it's of lions next to a river. It's very arresting. And then I also liked this photograph of Apocalypse by Francisco Negroni, which I'll put up as well. Both came from the Guardian site. Sometimes when things get a little fluid, I like holding my Hannah very tight and telling her I will always be there for her, which I will. And she tells me the sweetest things, and in an extraordinary way is a bomb disposal expert. And for an 8-year-old, that's an extraordinary thing. You know how it is, and oftentimes people make the mistake of thinking that if you shout louder, if you raise your fists first, you're winning. I don't think you are. Political reflections. Hong Kong government held its first formal talks with protesting students, and I did an interview on CCTV a while back. That link is back up there, and I said I think if it ends now, and I was talking about the situation a few weeks ago, and of course it will have just been a blip on the economic radar. I said if it continues for longer and the standoff becomes a new normal, the Hong Kong economy will slow down very dramatically, and GDP will turn negative extremely quickly. I asked, who is pulling the strings behind the protesters is an entirely different question. You know, there is a school of thought that China's geopolitical weak points are at the periphery of China, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and therefore it would be in some countries' interest to foment something that could spread from the periphery towards the center like a virus. China media says Hong Kong protesters are foreign puppets, ratcheting up the rhetoric against Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, saying protesters risk becoming foreign puppets. In an editorial in the English language daily Global Times, the paper linked the protest to other movements that China deems hostile to the Communist Party's authority. The external political situation concerning Occupy Central is increasingly clear-cut, the paper said, adding that a mix of traditional forces that are confronting the current Chinese regime, including Tibetan, Xinjiang and Taiwan separatists, Falun Gong devotees, and pro-democracy activists have beaten the drums for the Hong Kong protests like cheerleaders. My conclusions are that the authorities are offering Occupy Central exactly zero. And then this caught my attention in an article I was reading, and it mentions the adversarial nature of Washington's posture toward Beijing, and that's all about the pivot to Asia, which I've described before, and this theory of mine that the tinderbox is the periphery. US-Turkey part ways over Syria. This is MK Badra Kumar. President Barack Obama's strategy in the fight against the Islamic State in Syria gets considerable clarity with the 4-line announcement by the US Central Command that American military aircraft have made multiple drops of weapons, ammunition and medical supplies to the Kurdish fighters defending the northern Syrian city of Kobani, facing the Turkish border. In sum, Washington has parted ways with Ankara. Obama telephoned President Erdogan on Saturday and discussed steps that could be taken to counter the IS offensive against Kobani. Presumably, he took Erdogan into confidence about the need to arm and support the Kurdish fighters in Kobani. This is over the weekend. Erdogan stuck to his guns and on Sunday reiterated that Turkey considered the Syrian Kurdish group PYD as every bit a terrorist organization like the Iraqi Kurds belonging to the PKK. Erdogan, took a tough stance. It would be very wrong for America, with whom we are allies and with whom we are together within the NATO, to expect us to say yes after openly announcing such support for a terrorist organization. This is Erdogan. US cannot expect such a thing from us, and we cannot say yes to such a thing either. Erdogan also parried on the pending issue of Ankara making available Turkish air bases on the Syrian-Iraqi border for US operations. He said, "What are they, the US, asking for with regard to Incirlik? That's not clear. If there is something we deem appropriate, we would discuss it with our security forces and we would say yes. But if it is not appropriate, then saying yes is not possible for us either." Suffice to say, Obama made a last-ditch attempt to carry Erdogan along, but the endeavor failed, and he has since left the Turkish leader behind on his own. To be sure, Kurdish fighters in Kobani are in dire straits, and US supplies have become vital. Time is of the essence of the matter, but there are political dimensions too to Obama's decision to arm the Syrian Kurds. One, Obama has openly rejected Erdogan's notion of the Syrian Kurds being terrorists who allegedly enjoyed the covert backing of the Syrian regime. Two, Obama is unwilling to link the fight against the IS with the Turkish agenda of regime change in Syria. Three, Obama disfavors Erdogan's pet idea of creating a buffer zone and a no-fly zone in Syria from Aleppo northward to the Turkish border. Obama is wary of getting entangled with Erdogan's pipe dream of riding the wings of the Arab Spring and bringing about democratic transformation of the Middle East, spearheaded by the Muslim Brotherhood, under Turkish tutelage, of course. And I think, he's always insightful, Badr Kumar, but the key point is Erdogan has a checkered rep with President Obama, very credible school of thought, believes that it was Erdogan who manufactured the chemical weapons tripwire in Syria, and then tried to bulldoze President Obama into acting to depose Assad at that time. And I suspect, therefore, President Obama will continue to remain very circumspect, if not totally and eventually sidestepping Erdogan. I'll put up a photograph of the two of them. I'm looking forward to having lunch today with Johan Borgstam, the Swedish ambassador to Kenya, and talk to him about Sweden and these mysterious submarine sightings. Sweden's military is working on 2 new observations that could be evidence of suspected foreign underwater activity near the country's capital, the senior naval officer said on Tuesday. Swedish forces have been scouring the sea off Stockholm since Friday, after what the military called 3 credible reports of activity by foreign submarines or divers using an underwater vehicle. The vessels were unidentified, but during the 1980s, the Swedish Navy from time to time hunted suspected Soviet submarines in its waters. Today, I can also report that there have been 2 further observations which were made by members of the public that are interesting enough to require further follow-up work. I want to stress again that this is not a U-boat hunting operation, which has the aim of bringing down an opponent with military might, he said. Oscar de la Renta, of course, a very famous fashion designer, died. He was the fashion designer for Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy, amongst many others. And then I found an interesting piece in INSEAD about the social media New Deal for luxury brands. I'm not going to read it in full, but it's an interesting article. Do have a look at it. It's on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to take a look. Moving on to the currency markets, Euro soft, 127.24, dollar index 85.32. I think this is a re-entry point for the dollar index. Japanese yen 107 the figure, Swissy 0.9485, pound 161.27. Aussie 0.8788, India rupee 61.232, South Korean won 10.5253, Rial 248.08, Egyptian pound had where it's been 7.1503, and the South African rand tried to push through 11, but is back at 11.0416. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I think this is an opportunity to get back into the dollar, and I remain of the view, as expressed on the 29th of September, that the dollar has just started getting going. We've had a small retracement, but I think we'll have another surge. Euro dollar, still thinking, notwithstanding the recent pop higher, that might well trend to 120 before year end. Gold, 1247.80. I think shorts got squeezed. We've come back up as the dollar sold off, but I think that's probably now looking a little bit toppy to me. Crude oil, $82.45. I'll put up a 3-month chart. You know my feeling there that the oil price was kneecapped, and I suspect that we could see something down towards $50. When I mentioned my thoughts to Diana Layfield, she said $60 was feasible, and I think I'll take her point. I like this photograph of Tajikistan apparently welcoming foreign investors. It's a photograph of an aeroplane and a red carpet. I wrote that piece over the weekend about the Ebola severity lies in the speed of infections. I called it the escape velocity, a terminology I learned from Paul Virilio when he was speaking about digital currency. Virilio claims that as the last post-industrial resource, acceleration exceeds accumulation. And he calls it the escape velocity, the vitesse de libération, becomes the equivalent of profit. Believes that acceleration and speed are the defining characteristics of our new world. So my first point about the Ebola virus is that it is not about the absolute number of cases. It is about its escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. WHO recently predicted that the number of Ebola cases in 3 West African nations may jump to between 5,000 and 10,000 a week by December the 1st as the deadly viral infection spreads. My point is that we have not entered the parabolic phase yet, when the escape velocity is at its fastest, and therefore the comparison with malaria and influenza might make a nice infographic, but it's an irrelevant comparison. Then Asia Times reminded me of a comment made by Dr. Margaret Chan, who's the Director General of WHO, who said, when a deadly and dreaded virus hits the destitute and spirals out of control, the whole world is put at risk. Our 21st century societies are interconnected, interdependent, and electronically wired together as never before. Apparently, Ebola cases have risen sharply in western Sierra Leone. It emerged, of course, months ago in eastern Sierra Leone. Ebola is now hitting the western edges of the country, where the capital is located, with dozens of people falling sick each day, the government said. Many people are dying. Removing bodies is reportedly a problem. 49 confirmed cases of Ebola emerged in just one day, Monday, in 2 Ebola zones in and around the capital. So we still have not hit that parabolic phase, in my opinion. I like this comment, Nigeria has been classified as Ebola free, but it's going to be Shakespearean, so the new case will come any moment. Many desperate people in heavily affected countries outside Nigeria believe that Nigeria must have some especially good, maybe even magical treatments to offer. United States Consul General in Nigeria, Jeffrey Hawkins, said at the time that the last thing anyone in the world wants to hear is the 2 words Ebola and Lagos in the same sentence, saying it raised fears of an apocalyptic urban outbreak. Sudan's Omar al-Bashir will seek re-election. He was first seized power in a coup in 1989. IMF is urging caution in Africa's Eurobond borrowing spree. It comes with some risks, the director of the IMF's Africa Department, Antoinette Saye, told Reuters in an interview on Monday. Whereas what it costs the countries to issue these bonds can often look lower than what they would pay on domestic borrowing, the real cost in the final analysis will also depend on the evolution of exchange rates in the course of the life of the bond issuance. Ghana in 2007 became the first African beneficiary of debt relief to tap international capital markets. Since then, we've had Senegal, Nigeria, Zambia, Rwanda. In the last 2 years, we've seen New issuers: Kenya issuing the largest amount of sovereign bond this year, Cote d'Ivoire, as well as having issued this year, and then Rwanda last year. In 2014 alone, we've seen some $7 billion already in sovereign bond issues, which is a record high for the region. The IMF said on October 7 it expects sub-Saharan Africa's economy to grow by 5% this year, chopping it from 5.5% and accelerating to 5.8% in 2015. According to the IMF's projections, Chad will be the fastest growing country on a GDP basis in 2014, 9.6%, DR Congo 8.6%, Cote d'Ivoire 8.5%. Predicting Ethiopia to grow 8.2% in 2014 and 8.5% in 2015, Tanzania 7.2% in 2014, 7% in 2015. And look at this: South Sudan minus 47.6% in 2012, plus 27.1% in 2013. They are predicting minus 12.3% in 2014 and plus 19% in 2015. Trinidad and Tobago is substituting crude from Gabon, where there is no Ebola. There has been previously, with Colombian and Russian shipments amid protests by refinery workers alarmed by the outbreak of Ebola in other African countries. This is a scenario I had not considered, that people would start blocking African imports of oil on this basis. The decision follows the refusal of workers from Petro-Trin, which operates Trinidad's sole refinery, to assist with the berthing of a tanker that arrived in Trinidad waters on October 18 from Gabon. The vessel, called Overseas Yellowstone, eventually docked late yesterday using outsourced tugs and labor, Ramnarine said. The situation is dynamic and we will review it if need be. It should, however, be noted that there is no Ebola outbreak in Gabon. Interesting piece about today's budget in South Africa. The hard choices for Nene as slow growth crimps South African budget. The expectations are that the government will start to sell some assets because economic growth figures have been slower, tax take has been lower. A lot of talk around that they might sell their stake in Vodacom Group to shore up the budget. GDP was expected to be 2.7% this year and a 4% budget gap, but these are being blown out. Nene could announce the complete or partial privatization of some assets, which would mean a smaller liability for government. Then on paper he would be able to put down numbers which will keep the ratings agencies happy. Slowest growth since the 2009 recession has put tax revenue under pressure, complicating Nene's task of narrowing the fiscal shortfall, even as he has vowed to stick to the expenditure ceiling set by his predecessor, Pravin Gordhan. Standard & Poor's lowered the sovereign rating to one level above junk, that was in June, citing concerns about rising debt levels and slow economic growth. The yield on benchmark government securities due December 2026 has fallen 24 basis points this year to 8.02%. Considering selling a 13.9% stake in Vodacom, last major asset sale was in March 2003. Then the rand has fallen 24% against the dollar since the start of last year, which is the biggest fall of an emerging market currency against the dollar. The South African all-share bounced 1.96% yesterday. It's up 4.916% in 2014, but 3,712 points below 52,242, which was a record high reached on the 29th of July. Dollar rand tried to test the 11 level back at 11.04. I'll put up a 6-month chart. I'll also put up an image of Pistorius being escorted out of court by police to holding cells. Egyptian pound, steady as you like, at 7.15. The Egyptian stock market bounced 1.15% yesterday. It's up 27.292% in 2014, 1,178 points below a multi-year closing high reached on the 30th of September, just below 10,000. Nigerian all-share ticked 0.29% higher. It's bounced 579 points since the 17th of October, but remains negative 6.1772% in 2014. The Naira hit an eight-month low as firms hedged their currency risk of 165.55. Currency has lost 4.1% against the dollar so far this year. We admit that prospects of a near-term devaluation have risen thanks largely to the recent decline in oil prices. This is Morgan Stanley. I expect further weakness in the Naira because I expect further weakness in the price of oil, and had not even considered something like the Trinidad and Tobago news, where you might find, or Nigeria might find, oil being turned away. And on the 30th of October, that piece about oil, I said it is not too difficult to calculate who are the biggest losers in this new price normal, obviously Putin being one of them, but Nigeria is another. With global oil prices currently falling to $87 amidst fears of further collapse, Nigeria would be the worst hit African oil exporter if this drop should persist, says Business Insider. Others being hit are Bahrain, Oman, Russia, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia, but I think Saudi Arabia is seeing this as an opportunity to wash out higher base price producers. Nigerian elders question Boko Haram ceasefire deal. This is AFP. Nigeria's government may have negotiated a supposed ceasefire with only one faction of Boko Haram, an influential regional group has said, as violence continued unabated in the far northeast. The Borno Elders Forum, made up of retired senior civilian and military officials from the state, said attacks in recent days indicated not all Boko Haram fighters were aware of the deal announced on Friday. If they are aware and they are in agreement that there is a ceasefire, I don't think they would continue attacking innocent people and taking over places. It is either that those the federal government is negotiating with are not the Boko Haram but the usual 419ers, or it is just some kind of mockery, he told reporters in Maiduguri on Sunday evening. The term 419 refers to the section of the Nigerian Penal Code that deals with fraud and which has become a catch-all for con artists. Gubio was speaking after senior military and intelligence officials in the violence-racked region told AFP at the weekend that they had not been informed of the ceasefire. The Borno Elders Forum, which last month warned that Boko Haram had surrounded Maiduguri and was preparing to take over, suggested Abuja had not negotiated with the entire group. If the federal government does not know who the real Boko Haram are, I think they should come here to find out from us, Gubio said. The real Boko Haram who are killing us, who are burning our towns and villages, are not the Boko Haram that a peace deal was reached with. The Ghana Stock Exchange turned 0.37% higher. Somalia, apparently, according to a report in Al Jazeera, 4 tax collectors have been killed in Mogadishu in the last 3 months. Since 2012, at least 25 have been murdered. That's 19% of the city's 130 tax collecting staff. The IMF is projecting 5.3% GDP expansion in Kenya in 2014 and 6.2% in 2015. The shilling is trading around the 89 level. The Nairobi All-Share traded 0.36% lower yesterday. It remains 16.97% higher this year, but well off. We're currently at 159.84 versus 165.45, all-time high from the 23rd of September. NSE 20 up 6.76% year to date. At 5,259, it fell 0.39% yesterday, and that's versus 5,406 reached on the 22nd of September, which was a more than 6-year high. Uchumi has secured an additional loan of 600 million shillings from Kenya Commercial Bank. I think they need someone with deep pockets and a much more aggressive rollout plan, in my opinion. The market capitalization is just $29.226 million, which is egregious and surely is a tasty morsel for somebody who wants to enter this part of the world. Once again, thank you for stopping by.